Okay, well, I'm going to have a bit of a confession to make now. As some of you know, we almost didn't have a conference this year. As a matter of fact, I said several times that I wasn't going to have a conference. And for the first time, I'm going to announce why I decided initially to not have a conference. Within a week or two after last year's conference, I was approached by a man in black, an MIB. And the man in black came up to me and he says, Resta, no more conferences. Can't do it anymore. You're working against things here. We don't want word to get out. And if you know what's good for you and your family, no more conferences. And I said, whoa, not what I was expecting. So the person was willing to have a conversation with me, and I got an idea we had a little bit of wiggle room. So I sort of made the man in black an offer that he couldn't refuse. And the offer was that if I let him speak, would he be willing to let me have a conference? And he said yes. And that's when we decided to turn things around. But the story doesn't end there, because you see, by the time I got finished with this gentleman, he made me a man in black too. Couldn't resist that, folks, sorry. All right, kidding aside, as I mentioned earlier, this is a book that I heartily recommend, The Spectrum. Last year, I'm not sure, maybe it was this year, it doesn't matter, but I went to a Fort Fest conference that Sue Switek was having, and I saw this gentleman speak about the Men in Black Enigma, which he ought to know because he is one, right? And I was so impressed, I went up to him right afterwards and I said, you know what, I gotta have you at Mysteries of Space and Sky. And he said, well, I don't know. He says, you know, nowadays my schedule's pretty booked because I gotta go around to a lot of people and tell them to keep their mouths shut. I said, all right. I said, well, I understand, but could you make this one exception? So he's coming all the way down from Philly, right, Philadelphia, to talk about this enigma of the Men in Black, and maybe talk a little bit about this amazing book as well. Please welcome the Man in Black himself, Justin Bamforth.
All right, test. All right, cool. Well, thanks for all of you guys coming out today. I know I saw a few of you at Fort Fest this summer. Let's just see in the audience, how many of you were at Fort Fest, just so I know. Oh, great. Okay, just a few of you. All right. That's fantastic, because I'm going to do the same talk again, thanks to Peter, who graciously invited me here, so thank you very much. And for those of you who have already listened to me ramble once before, I won't be offended if you get abducted to the back, you know, or out in the hallway or something. That's fine. And for those of you who missed out on Fort Fest, well, shame on you, because that was a fantastic conference. It was really cool. So you're in for a treat today. It's probably the last time I'll give this specific talk, or if some have put it, a Men in Black 101 course, so to speak. There's no academic credit given, but my course book will be available for sale afterwards. Now, since we only have an hour together, I won't be taking questions out of respect to the other speakers' time, but if you have something you want to share with me, feel free to see me in the back next to Mr. Carr. And to my CIA handlers over there somewhere, I'm glad you guys decided to show up. It adds some level of credibility to this nonsense, I suppose. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Justin Bamforth. I'm an investigator, a researcher, author into the unexplained. Whatever you want to call it, you know, paranormal, UFOs, metaphysics, everyone seems to have their specific line of focus, and yet seldom do I see the ghost guys interacting with the UFO folks, and the crypto seekers talking with them, and so on. But honestly, that's why I like these Fortean events, because as I've said before, you guys get it. And for those of you who don't, you'll soon find out, because all of this stuff is interconnected and interrelated. If you don't get anything out of this presentation and you just want to snooze away, that's fine, but just remember that one thing. It'll save you a lot of time in the long run. Over the years, I've been tackling this from different angles, but there's this peculiar facet involving the Men in Black that's always intrigued me. It seems to have aspects of not only UFOs associated with it, but the paranormal too. Yet the Men in Black are some of the most overlooked and least understood parts of high strangeness. But my job today here is not to convince you one way or the other, or even deter you in your beliefs. I just want you to approach the topic from a different angle altogether. More importantly, to question what you think you know, and further research what you don't. A lot of you may be well versed in ghost hunting or sky watching or multitude of different things. But I want you to consider that these things, whatever they are, may not be what we think they are or wish they were. The Men in Black entities that we know of today may not be limited only to the UFO experience, but rather a part of all this unexplained madness, where reality and non-reality converge, the street corner of what I call the spectrum. But to most people, the Men in Black are nothing more than a reference to this film franchise. Good news for you, though, there are no neuralizers in this presentation. But the film franchise actually draws from a very real type of experience, and one that quite often trails the UFO experience, as I've said before. That's why it's been closely associated with it. But it's possibly the most disturbing and spookiest aspect altogether. Not because it trails the initial experience, but because it is an extension of the experience itself. The exact function of the Men in Black, or the MIB, as we refer to them as, is unknown, yet they appear to serve a dual purpose, both as information extraction and information suppression, or so it would seem. Most have linked them with, military or government entities because of a similar type of agenda. But based on the conduct and mannerisms of these MIB, that may not be the case. In fact, they may not even be human at all. I know that sounds rather far-fetched, but you'll soon see why in some of these case reports. Even though they've been around for a lot longer and all throughout human history, just referred to in different contexts, the more popular origin of the MIB can be traced back to the 1950s, or the height of the modern age of ufology, as it's known as. Now, at that time, people often reported their UFO sightings to law enforcement or military because it was the right thing to do. And some may argue, still is. It's not like where people are quite distrustful of government institutions today. Back then, they did what they were told, and they thought it was something that was helpful. And maybe it still is, I'm not sure. Unfortunately, in some cases, this resulted in a knock at the door, or a visit by the men in suits. And with some of these more fantastic incidents, the witness would be told to shut up or face dire consequences. So that's precisely what they did. They went dark, and they didn't talk to reporters or UFO investigators. They no longer wanted to discuss their case. This earned the MIB the nickname the UFO silencers. But there was still something that bothered the witness at the very core of the encounter: the MIB's seemingly supernatural abilities. Now, again, these visits could have been legit government people maybe inquiring into their incident. I mean, we know today for a fact that they did study the phenomenon with the likes of the ATIP and OSAP programs, just a few that we now know of, beyond Project Blue Book. But perhaps some of these MIB encounters were deliberate attempts to keep quiet on top-secret aircraft or to prevent foreign enemies from gaining access to sensitive data. Back then, Soviet intelligence agents were known to infiltrate UFO groups and influence contactees. This lasted all the way up until the late 80s with the Cold War. And they did this in order to gain access to our military secrets and technology and create confusion within the U.S. government. Not to mention that the Soviets also had their own paranormal programs going on. Russia has always had a very high interest in psychical studies, long before the U.S. ever began theirs with the remote viewing and such. Of course, the Men in Black could have also been rival UFO groups telling witnesses to keep quiet so that they themselves might be the first to break a story. again, we must consider this angle too, since there were a lot of UFO groups running rampant at that time. It's not like today, in which there's primarily MUFON and API and a few other independent groups looking into this. Perhaps back then the investigators were telling people to shut up just to have the scoop. Yet with a small handful of MIB reports, there remains some doubt as to if the men were really what they appeared to be altogether. And although most of the reports we hear of are mainly men, there are also women in black too. Now, they might pose as members of some fictitious UFO group. They might be in the audience here today, I don't know, or they might pretend to be from some non-existent branch of government. Even more disturbing, like I mentioned earlier, pretending to be simply human altogether. Now, one of the first well-known examples of the men in black is found in the curious case of Albert Bender. He was president of the hugely successful International Flying Saucer Bureau in 1952. But his group mysteriously shut down a year later. Why? Well, apparently he had a run-in with 3 of these mysterious men in black figures. Bender claimed to have figured out the mystery of the UFOs at that time and planned to publish a report on it. But shortly after making that bold claim, he was visited by 3 strange characters, which shut him up for good. And it was one that he never fully recovered from either. You see, those closest to Bender noted that he had become a changed man. He suddenly dropped all of his UFO research and assumed another identity, managing a hotel somewhere in California, just to escape the lingering after effects of the MIB. Things like severe migraines, which Bender believed were caused by these entities whenever he merely just talked about them. Or maybe Bender's fears got the best of him and it was just simply a psychosomatic effect. Either way, his encounter had a profound impact, as do many, if not all of these experiences do at some point in time. Not to mention that there are instances which suggest that the MIB really do have the ability to affect things. For example, Dr. Herbert Hopkins in 1976. Dr. Hopkins encountered a solitary man in black who posed as the vice president of a fictitious New Jersey UFO group. Dr. Hopkins received a phone call from this guy, and as soon as he hung up the phone, the man was already at his door. But there is this peculiar angle to that story that resulted in a bizarre display of power. The penny that Dr. Hopkins had was told to hold in the palm of his hand dematerialized right before his eyes. This was followed by the man in black alluding to the fact that he could do the same to him. In fact, this strange man referenced the death of a well-known abductee named Barney Hill and said, "Do you really think Barney Hill died of a heart attack?" Well, he died because he knew too much. Shortly thereafter, the man was gone, and a terrified Dr. Hopkins destroyed all the files he had on an alien abductee he had been working with at the time named David Stevens, and he thought it was somehow related. But what a lot of people aren't aware of is that the encounters with Dr. Hopkins didn't stop with just him. His late nephew, Howard, detailed some of the stories that circulated within the Hopkins family. And one of those was this bizarre story involving Dr. Hopkins' son, John, which would have been Howard's cousin, and John's wife, Maureen. 2 weeks after Dr. Hopkins' Men in Black visit, Maureen also received a phone call from a man that claimed she knew John and wanted to meet with them. So John went to the local restaurant to pick up both the man and his female companion. Even though they were strangers, John still felt compelled to invite them back to his home, which was eerily similar to how his father, Dr. Hopkins, responded to his visitor. The stranger's appearance and posture were described as peculiar, as they wore odd, old-fashioned clothes and took short steps while also leaning forward as they walked, almost as if they were afraid to fall. John noted an abnormality with the woman in that her legs and breasts were rather awkwardly positioned in relation to the rest of her body. Now again, these could have just been strange people too, so take it with a grain of salt. Once at the house, though, the strange couple asked John and Maureen rather mundane questions, things like what they watch on TV or what they read in books or what the two of them talk about most of the time. And on the surface, it just seems like small talk, right? Similar to like how people say, "Oh, how's the weather?" Or talk about traffic or sports or whatever. But in the case of these two strangers, it just marked the beginning of this odd behavior. During the meeting, the man fondled his female companion and asked John and Maureen if he was doing it right. When John later excused himself, the man asked Maureen how she was made and whether she had any nude pictures of herself. After an uncomfortable set of exchanges, the strangers quickly excused themselves and left the home without even a goodbye. And I'm so glad there's no kids in the audience to hear that, because that's really disturbing. The entire Hopkins family, they abruptly then moved from Maine to Florida shortly thereafter without much notice. Maybe it was to escape all the weirdness. Alien abductees sometimes relate painful physical symptoms when simply just talking about their own experiences. I'm sure Peter can talk to this as well. Like I mentioned with Albert Bender, some abductees will suffer intense headaches that cease only when they stop talking about their events. As paranormal investigators will also tell you, similar concepts emerge when dealing with demonic cases or negative influence or negative infestation cases and such. Again, perhaps the phenomenon can influence or affect us from a distance, whether we're aware of it or not, a sort of psychic backlash that can haunt both experiencers and researchers alike, regardless of whatever form it decides to take, whether it's alien grays, spiritual forces, or these so-called men in black. Whatever the form is, there's no doubt something is interfering with people talking about their experiences. Now, the moniker given to the men in black is rather misleading, because reports suggest their presence can vary from one case to the next. Yet in a large body of cases, they seem to take on common themes. Contrary to the popular notion that the guys are strictly, dressed like me, they have also been reported in casual clothing, brown suits, gray attire, blue outfits. So for us to say that they only wear black is rather inaccurate. They could be seen wearing just about anything. But one of the commonalities that they all seem to share is this ill-fitting clothes, whether too baggy or too tight, or extremely neat clothes without a single wrinkle, fold, or crease whatsoever. Facial characteristics are another thing that stand out, but they follow a general trend. Odd. A lot of witnesses that I've talked with have described them as either deathly pale, or the opposite with deep suntans, or maybe they're very olive in their complexion. When fellow Fordian John Keel was doing his research, he would often show a bunch of pictures of various ethnic groups and have the witness point to whomever closely resembled these MIB that they encountered. And more often than not, the witnesses pointed to the picture of a person of Sami descent. Now, the Sami people are defined as natives or inhabitants of large parts of Norway and Sweden, northern parts of Finland, and northwestern Russia. They were previously known as Laplanders, after the Lapland area in the same region, but that term has become rather outdated and less than politically correct. There is, however, some interesting history behind their culture and beliefs, like Sami shamanism, for example, in which their reincarnation cosmology divides the world into three quadrants: the upper world, personified by the color white, the middle human world being red, and the underworld, represented by the color black. But getting back to the MIB's appearance, they seem to have hair that is rather phony, like a wig. Or they may just arrive without any facial hair, head hair, or sideburns whatsoever. Their eyebrows may even appear painted on, and their lips an obvious red like lipstick. Their eyes have also been reported to not even blink as they just stare at people. And they possess a telepathic ability to know intimate details about an individual. And there's common mannerisms in the way that they move, too. Now, this angle comes up time and again in my own research, this awkward, clunky, or even mechanical movement that they seem to exhibit, whether it's just one, a pair, a trio, and they somehow just show up, too. Sometimes they're seen coming out of a car, not just a black car, but the car just suddenly appears out of nowhere. In the same manner, they will disappear just as quickly, too. One example that was shared with me after Fort Fest, fairly recently here, was from a New Jersey couple named Mike and Beth. This took place in August of this year. They were on their way to the site of the well-documented Stonehenge incidents. And this was a group of UFO sightings that took place in and around the Stonehenge apartment building in January of 1975 in North Hudson Park, which is located in North Bergen County, New Jersey. Bud Hopkins investigated this as well. As the couple, as Mike and Beth were up there to investigate for their own purposes and to see if any activity exists today, they noticed that the navigational tool within their iPhone was beginning to act up and malfunction as they approached the site, which they claim had never happened in this way before. Beth described it as like a burst of static noises, like a ch-ch-ch coming through the iPhone, which was not hooked up to the car stereo, and the static bursts were in direct sync with the phone's display blinking in and out. And it was in these 3 rapid successions. Now, could this just be a technical glitch? Yeah, sure. It's a possibility, but here's the kicker. The technological interruptions that took place happened at the exact same spot where one of the original witnesses to the events in 1975 also had technical issues. That witness was George Obarski, and he had his car radio act out of sorts. But Obarski's experience took place at the same time that he noticed a round, unusual craft overhead. And that craft landed in the park adjacent to a baseball field where 9 to 11 small figures exited the craft and proceeded to take soil samples. So going back to this past August, Mike and Beth parked their car. They decided to hang out in this park, which is apparently, again, like the same area where Obarski saw his craft land. Now, Mike and Beth are sitting on a nearby park bench when a shorter, pale-looking man of presumably Asian descent approaches them. Now, even though Asian people can be lighter in their skin tone, Beth noted this man's overly pale complexion and described him as someone who, quote, needed sunshine, end quote. The couple saw this man approach their bench, but walking funny. Here we go again. He was leaning forward at an angle and not standing straight up. And he wasn't an older man hobbled over either, as he looked like he was in his late 20s or early 30s. But they didn't see him enter the scene. All of a sudden, he's just there. And then the man turns and looks directly at Beth and starts sniffing her like a hound dog. Yeah, that's a first. I've never heard that one. Then he puts his head right up to Mike and starts sniffing him. And then the man turns away and walks out of sight really, really fast. So the man in black is now turning to the man who sniffs. This stuff is weird. But when the men in black, or whatever you want to call them, I like to refer to them as non-human entities. Whenever they are present, it doesn't seem to be for an extended period of time. It's almost like they're running off of some sort of energy source that directly affects their motor skills and their ability to communicate. And from the people I've interviewed, this seems to be another commonality. This ability also seems to deteriorate at a rapid rate the longer that they are present. But they might not just interact with a person directly. As we've heard about now, they might just phone them first. Now, you might know who this guy is. I know Sue knows who he is. This is Gary Sudbrink. I won't go into much detail about Gary Sudbrink because a lot of you are familiar with this case, and again, due to time. But for those of you who don't know who he is, this guy received some strange phone calls on what he believes are possibly MIB in nature. But what some of you may not be aware of is that not only Gary, but also his father and one of his brothers have had encounters with these strange phantom helicopters driven by these bizarre occupants. Again, here we have the MIB-like individuals showing up in helicopters this time instead of automobiles. Is this another extension of the MIB experience? I believe it is. But in this presentation, I'm just going to keep focused on direct encounters with these guys. I get in that helicopter angle in my book, or just come see me afterwards and we'll chat. If you go to my website, normalparanormal.org, and look for the post, Strange Calls from a Mysterious Entity, you can listen to all these phone calls for yourself. I put them all up there. And you'll get a general overview of the case. It's really bizarre. But it plays right into the seemingly mechanical, robotic nature of the MIB. Now, it's hard to consider this possibility that this phenomenon has the ability to take on human form, maybe as an attempt to fit in, but we have to consider it as there's more than enough testimony which may suggest it. These, like I mentioned earlier, these men in black or these non-human entities in general, they may be connected to all facets of high strangeness and not just tied to ufology. Again, shape-shifting beings, they've been a part of our folklore since the beginning of time. So it should come as no surprise when we see it emerge in modern mythology today. Whether or not we choose to accept the UFO phenomenon, peculiar visits from peculiar people just seem to be another aspect of the human experience as a whole. Just pop in your local Walmart and you'll see what I mean. Now, it is worth mentioning, though, in Albert Bender's case, he was also deeply involved in occult practices in addition to UFOs. Perhaps there is the connection. Some have often wondered if Bender might have opened a doorway to which he could not shut. On another side of the coin, perhaps maybe it's when we become aware of the phenomenon that it becomes aware of us, too. Nick Redfern is an excellent researcher who writes on all aspects of the Men in Black and tons of other paranormal topics too. He cranks out a book a month, which is a paranormal feat. Anyways, the two women who publish his books, they had their own set of encounters with these bizarre MIB entities. Unfortunately, the one woman, Lisa Hagen, did not want to talk to me about it for whatever reason, but the second woman, Beth Wareham, did. And so she opened up to me about all these strange experiences that took place while she was editing one of Nick's books. It was at one point that Beth became absolutely inundated with harassment from these entities. She told me that there was everything from crackling phones to creepy voices coming on the line to just being on the street and seeing these guys, even in her home. And these experiences lasted for the entire length of editing Redfern's book. But then they ceased right after that. It wasn't until she began work on the follow-up manuscript dealing with the women in black that the activity ramped up again. A WIB even waited for Beth on the stoop across the street from where she lived, just to let her know that it was there. Now, that's some creepy stuff. And there was one particular event during the initial MIB infestation. It didn't involve the classic MIB per se. Instead, it centered on one of these strange photographers. And this is another aspect to these strange individuals that boggles my mind. As soon as Beth stepped out of the front door of her New York City brownstone, she encountered a man taking pictures of the front of it. Now, he didn't look out of place, but he possessed some sort of large setup camera. It wasn't like one of those old-fashioned giant flashbulb ones, but it was still a rather large rig that to her, it stood out. Especially in our digital era of slim everything, and small pocket cameras and phones and whatnot. In all her time living in that individual building, though, Beth had never seen anyone so fascinated with taking photos of her place. So she was getting annoyed, so she yelled at the guy. And the man took off down the street, just running. But the way that she described his running, she said it was a, quote, goofy, jerky with his legs, end quote. And again, this is consistent with the other reports. These individuals, this weird mechanical movement, this trouble controlling their bodies. And again, going back to the strange photographer thing, it seems to be something that comes up time and again. For example, another case is the Robinson case from July of 1974 in Atlantic City. A woman named Geraldine Robinson, along with her late husband and two daughters, all had an encounter involving a strange photographer. A man suddenly comes out of nowhere, and he's on the boardwalk. And he starts taking photographs of 12-year-old Lisa and 4-year-old Tina. Now, the man, for whatever reason, seemed to be more focused on photographing Tina when the mom, Geraldine, suddenly took note of him. Being a naturally protective mother, she instantly confronted him. And in an instant, the man simply vanishes. She said, Geraldine said that when she turned around her head, it was just for a split second. She turns back around, and he's gone. But what stood out in both Geraldine and Lisa's recollection of this incident was the man's attire. Again, it came off as out of place. The man's completely covered up in all dark clothes, either black or navy blue. They couldn't tell which, but he had long pants, a long sleeve shirt, and a blazer. And Geraldine told me that, quote, nobody's on the boardwalk in the middle of July like that, end quote. And considering that everybody else on that hot summer day was either wearing a swimsuit or shorts or a halter top, it would be rather out of place. Going back to Beth Wareham's case, in her view, these MIB are not so much scary as they are just plain goofy. Although they annoyed her greatly at the time, she admits that it was comical too. To her, the entities she encountered did not feel very threatening since they always appeared very thin. And whenever she'd yell at them, they would just jump up and disappear. So since we should always be looking for patterns in the phenomenon, let's make a note of that these guys could be even more timid than we realize. Confrontation or pursuit of them seems to have an adverse reaction to their scare tactics or their intimidation techniques. When we reverse the tables on them, they make a quick exit. Going back to John Keel, he couldn't even catch them. Whenever he'd receive a call that they were in the vicinity, he'd race over and then they'd be gone. And he'd miss them by just a few minutes. But are these strangers real in the sense that they exist in our physical reality? In Beth's case, whenever she noticed them, she always caught them in her periphery. And then poof, they would simply disappear. Or turn around a corner and vanish when she yelled at them. Now, since her reaction in the moments was characterized by high levels of stress, it's worth wondering if perhaps her state of mind wasn't somehow feeding these entities or giving them the ability to manifest. Again, it's the same concept applied to negative entities on the paranormal front. Perhaps there is this correlation between our emotional and mental states and this glimpse into this other realm. Similar to Albert Bender's case, where he was actively seeking out these things, one could argue it's the mindset we're in that maybe becomes us to become aware of them or them to become aware of us. It's always the possibility, but not always the case. You see, it's the experiencers that become targets for the phenomenon, but it's also the investigators that try to help them too. And some of you in the audience know firsthand what I mean by that. One example is with fellow author and screenwriter Marie D. Jones. To date, she's written on a variety of topics, from cutting-edge science to paranormal, ancient history, consciousness, even government mind control. And she's experienced harassment issues, especially because of the government mind control stuff. She told me when she was working on her book, Mind Wars, she was followed and interrogated by the FBI on numerous occasions. But it wasn't until she became involved with the alien abduction phenomenon in the 80s and 90s that things were much more unsettling and on a totally different level. At that time, the abduction phenomenon was just starting to attract widespread media coverage. You know, you had people like Bud Hopkins, Dave Jacobs, Whitley Strieber, who were publishing their works and talking about this. But there weren't as many resources for abductees to turn to as there are today. So Marie, she organized a local MUFON group with another woman that she refers to as Anna, out of the other woman's home in northern San Diego County in California. And Anna, along with her husband, were both abductees. Marie was not, at least to my knowledge. The two women formed a solid friendship, and the group flourished. All was well, until Marie began to receive strange phone calls at her house. She described them to me as the caller sounding male, robotic, almost like it was using a voice-changing gadget. This is similar to the Gary Sudbring tapes. But the caller seemed to also know things about Marie that no one else knew about. Things like what book was lying on her bed, what she was wearing, even specific details of what she had done in her 20s that no one else knew about but her. Now, if that wasn't creepy enough, the caller also knew when she was home alone and was aware that it would creep her out if it called at that time. So he, or rather it, seemed to insinuate, at least according to Marie, that it could inflict physical harm if it wanted, even though it never actually stated as such. So she thought her house was bugged. This was before caller ID, so she had no idea who was calling her, but eventually the calls were too much to bear, so she just had her number changed. But what's interesting about the calls, too, is they were less interested in Marie and more interested in her group and what was going on with abduction research. The caller would say something like, your group is familiar with that abductee, or this abductee, or that person, or this person, just to let her know that it was aware of the group's activities. Meanwhile, the other woman, Anna, received strange robotic phone calls, but this harassment went one step further. Anna and her husband, they lived in a semi-rural area. They received knocks at the doors from these curious-looking characters in the middle of the night and observed people on their property that just hung around. They even had their home broken into on occasion. But there was one point when Anna's husband went outside with a gun in an attempt to confront these guys. But he described them as appearing like robots, very stiff and stilted, staring without blinking their eyes. Yet they still looked human overall. After that, Anna Marie disbanded the group, and they never looked back. At Fort Fest, I shared with you guys something that happened to investigator Timothy Frick, who a lot of you are good friends with or know of. He's commonly associated with the Point Pleasant, West Virginia region, the site of lots of MIB encounters during the Mothman sightings in 66, 67. He agrees with the possibility that the MIB could be artificial beings, similar to a robot or android, but a lot more complex. Timothy and his brother John, they had a strange impersonation encounter too. The ironic thing is that both of them dress up and impersonate the Men in Black for the annual Mothman Festival each year. Yet, in their case, the MIB were seen impersonating the Frick brothers, impersonating the MIB. In early November of 2006, the Frick brothers, they visited a woman named Shirley in northeastern Ohio. 1 week after their visit with Shirley, Shirley contacts them, sends them an email, and says, "Hey, had you returned to the neighborhood unannounced?" And they were confused because they're like, no, we hadn't. So the story goes, Shirley was out taking her dog out, and she noticed a vehicle pull into the church parking lot across from where she lived. As two tall men got out of their vehicle, they appeared to walk funny. Here we go with the movements again. Shirley watched them, thinking it could have been Tim and John, only to realize that they were watching her. So she goes back in her house, and she's peering through these guys, similar like this picture, through the blinds, right? When a second vehicle pulls into the parking lot, and a third man got out to talk to the other two. Then all of a sudden, all three men get into their respective vehicles, and they drive away. So the next day, Shirley is testing out a baby monitor she wanted to sell, and she inadvertently picks up a stray phone call between her neighbors. Ironically enough, the neighbors were talking about the strange men from the night before. Shirley learned that this third man who pulled up, he was one of the neighbor's sons who had gone out to confront these two guys because he thought it was suspicious. But the two tall men told the son that their names were Tim and John and that they were paranormal investigators. Even more peculiar was in the week before, when the Frick brothers actually went to visit Shirley, they talked with her in the same church parking lot at about the same time of night, too. After their actual meeting with Shirley that week, the Frick brothers drove on to another Ohio location where an unusual white van kept pace with them for over 30 minutes straight. And it passed them on the road several times. Through its slightly tinted windows, the Frick brothers could see 3 or 4 men inside wearing three-piece suits similar to their own MIB attire, but without the trademark black sunglasses. At one point, when the van was in front of them, they noticed the license plate read 111L, along with the words unregistered vehicle above it. They found this entire set of incidents rather eerie. Now, this is an actual photo that was taken and sent to me by Timothy, and he said, he apologizes for the bad quality and the fact that it's not like really zoomed in. But this was at a different time when we didn't have like awesome photo capabilities with our phones and whatnot. John Keel and Brad Steiger, they talked about how when they used to meet with witnesses, they'd be shocked and frustrated to hear that the witnesses would tell them that they had already been there to meet with them, or they would be told that one of their assistants had already come out. But the thing is, they didn't have any assistants. And the fake assistants would be just mere minutes before the real investigators, too. Another great example of this, what I'm going to call the delayed mirroring effect, for lack of a better descriptor, something that happened to me after I gave an extended version of this very same talk that you're listening to right now, only last year, to an audience in Bordentown, New Jersey. Myself and several others were invited by 2 women named Marty Haynes and Marsha Moore to speak at one of their fellow neighborhood businesses in Bordentown. It was called the Old Town Pub. There's a picture of it right there. There's a sign on the side of the building that reads the Farnsworth House, since it's right there on Farnsworth Avenue. Now, every Tuesday during the month of October last year, there was a different speaker who would lecture. So I kicked off the month talking about this nonsense. And then there was Bruce Tango, father of Dave Tango from Ghost Hunters. He's got like another show out now. And then there was, on the 3rd week, a husband and wife team named Rosalind and Michael Lewis. For what it's worth, Michael Lewis has had direct encounters with these non-human entities. But he just considers them strange people. He doesn't call them men in black. But it was on the 3rd week, as Roz and Michael were lecturing, or had just finished lecturing, when the event organizers, Marty and Marsha, decided to go outside for a smoke break. They're right standing here, like looking out outside the pub, right at this pharmacy there. And they noticed an odd-looking man. And the man was coming diagonal across the street to where the pub was. And they looked again, and he had already crossed the street. And to them, it was remarkable how quickly he had done so. They commented on this to one another, but then to their amazement, he was gone. They wondered where he went, so they just like peeked around the corner of the pub, looking down this way. So the pub's on the right here. The pharmacy's over here. And now he's all the way down the end of this street, Railroad Avenue. And this was all within a matter of seconds. Now, how this guy got from point A to point B in such a blazingly short amount of time, it became the topic of conversation between the two of them real quick. So much to their surprise, when all of a sudden now he's directly in front of them in the pub. This guy walked right past the 2 women, didn't acknowledge either one of them or anyone on the street for that matter, and he peeked into the pub for a quick second to look inside, then abruptly popped his head back out, walked down the rest of Farnsworth Avenue in the direction away from the pharmacy. Marty and Marsha turned towards each other in disbelief. They looked back down Farnsworth. A split second later, and he's completely gone. This time for good. Where he went, they have no idea. In the description that the two women gave me, they said that the man was very thin, very pale, wearing your textbook black fedora hat, along with a long, dark trench coat. In this case, it was dark gray. But here's where it varies, because this guy was also seen wearing jeans and sneakers. And Marty distinctly remembers him wearing shaded glasses, which was bizarre since this was at night. And it would have been after 9 p.m., so it was certainly dark by that time in October. Now, was this one of your stereotypical MIB? Who knows? Was he there for me? Well, your guess is as good as mine. If he was, he must never have gotten the memo, because I was there, a few weeks earlier. Was he there for Rosalind and Michael? It's another possibility, considering that, like I mentioned before, Michael has had direct encounters with these guys. I asked him about this, and he brought up another interesting point. Perhaps these guys are just meant as a form of like reconnaissance or data acquisition. Like they have to be in the vicinity where certain people are in order to gain access or retrieve someone's thoughts. Again, it's all speculation. But what's interesting is that no one else reacted to this man. No one had to step out of their way of him. It was almost like Marty and Marsha were aware of him, but he wasn't aware of them or anyone. And also the fact that prior to the start of my lecture on this subject that month, Marty and Marsha had no clue about MIB. So was this a case when people become aware of the phenomenon and suddenly becomes visible to them? Again, we can only speculate. But have these MIB ever been caught on camera? The short answer is yes, but it's extremely rare. We don't have time to get into these backstories, but these are considered some of the best in terms of so-called evidence. These photos have dates and witnesses with names to support them, unlike most of YouTube and Reddit, which has a plethora of bogus crap, which you can't verify or disprove. So don't believe everything you see out there on the internet. Now, I get sent lots of links from people who don't know any better, and I always say that the red flag to watch out for is if there's no exact location provided, no precise date given, no names of witnesses to track down, let alone a backstory, then it's probably junk. But there is one video that was posted to YouTube in 2009, which does have all of this and more, which I'll share with you today. That's the Shane Sovar case out of Canada, which to date, this video has about, like 10 million or so views on YouTube as a result of BuzzFeed and Coast to Coast picking it up. Now, this case was initially covered by the Aerial Phenomena Investigations Team, or API. This is the same group that Paul Carr, sitting back there, who'll be speaking later today. He's part of it. But I think this one was before you came on board, maybe, because this was okay. So Marsha Barnhart was the lead investigator on this case. She's still with the team, but I contacted Marsha to get the straight story on this case since I heard about it back then. But there wasn't anything else to go off of. It was just a plethora of inaccurate and misinformation regarding this case. In short, security camera footage circulated by API showed these two MIB on the left there as they entered the front lobby of a hotel in Niagara Falls, Ontario. It's the Sheraton Falls View Hotel to be exact. It's still there today, but under another name. According to witnesses who interacted with these MIB firsthand, they were in search of the hotel's manager, Shane Sovar. Now, usually it's a quick turnaround for these so-called UFO silencers to get on the scene for following a particular sighting, but in the case of Shane, it's different. The MIB didn't show up until 7 months after his initial sighting. So let's rewind back to that date first. October 14th, 2008. Shane and the hotel's security manager, they witnessed this black triangle. It's over the hotel's property at about 10:30. It hovered silently, went right over Shane's head. This allowed him to see in greater detail. There are 3 white lights, one on each tip, and a big red light underneath that pulsated like a heartbeat. It literally crawled over top of him, practically hovering, but by the time it reached the field across the street, it took off in a blink of an eye and was gone. As Shane shared this experience at work the next day, one of the hotel bellmen, they confirmed that several other black triangles had also been reported in the Fort Erie newspaper. Now, at the bottom of those reports was the name of UFO researcher Brian Vike from a UFO investigation group in British Columbia. His group was specifically looking into these types of black triangle cases. So Shane reported a sighting to him. At the time, there were several reports of the same type of these triangular craft. They were seen along both the Canadian and U.S. sides of Niagara Falls that same year, 2008. Now, about a week later, the craft came back to visit the Sheraton Falls View Hotel. This is not a photo of that craft. This is just, an image offline. But this is why I tell UFO witnesses to keep looking up and watch the skies for several nights after you do see something. A lot of these times, these craft do come back. For Shane, his second sighting was again another triangular object, similar to the first one. Only this time was at a much higher altitude. He could see the same shape and light formation as it hovered over the hotel and then zipped into Niagara Falls, or into the Niagara River, and disappeared. Now, Shane relayed the sighting to his wife, Catherine, who had already been highly skeptical of the first sighting. And after hearing a similar account from her hairdresser earlier in the day, suddenly she's a believer. Turns out Shane's story was also reported in a local newspaper, and that's how I was able to find him. But again, that's not the end of his story. Before we get into the MIB aspect, it's important to note that Shane had a profound encounter in the time between his UFO sightings and his MIB encounter, which were never reported. Why? Well, because a lot of times UFO people only ever want to focus on the UFO stuff. About a week following his second UFO sighting, Shane was outside cleaning leaves out of his gutter. Again, out of the corner of his eye, he notices an older, shorter man who approached him. Now, this man wore a suit with an external jacket on top of that, as well as a hat. He stopped in front of Shane's house, and he just smiles up at Shane. And Shane came down off the ladder, and the man replied, "I built this house." Shane goes, "Oh, you're the original owner?" He goes, yes, I built this house." And the man was like overjoyed at the appearance, and he then asked to see the backyard. So Shane comes down off his ladder. He gives him a little tour outside and whatnot. And then the man goes, "My gosh, the trees, they're so big now, the trees. My daughters used to roll down these hills." And then the man suddenly goes, "Okay, I'm going to go now." And he just shuffles down the sidewalk, taking small steps that appeared as if his feet weren't even lifting off the ground. And as he departed, he mentioned to Shane, "I'll see you next year." A few weeks later, Shane was out talking with his neighbor Nancy, and he mentioned this random meeting. And he said, it was this old man who claimed to be the original constructor of the house. But Nancy, who had lived next door for like some 60-plus years, she was just like dumbfounded. She goes, "Shane, you got to be kidding me. He's dead. That man died like 15 years ago." So thinking back on the way in which Shane conducted himself while interacting with his presumably ghostly guest, he never once made contact with the man. He never even extended a handshake to greet him or to say goodbye. Now, given Shane's profession of meeting new people on a daily basis since he was a hotel manager, he thinks this is remarkable because this would have been an unusual reaction for him not to do. From that point on, more paranormal activity would take place in his house, from toys operating on their own in the middle of the night, even with batteries taken out of them, to phantom footsteps, strange clicks and beeps on his landline telephone. Items would go missing, they would reappear somewhere else, all sorts of crazy stuff that's very similar to like negative cases on the paranormal front. Then the activity would die down for a while, and then it would ramp back up. And he and his wife explained to me it was a very scary time to be in the house, so much so that they had even considered selling it just because of this. I then find out later on that it was also a very stressful time for them, not because of this activity, but because in their personal lives and their professional lives, they were undergoing a lot of stress, especially Catherine. It was suggested by one of his colleagues to burn sage, and that's everybody's favorite metaphysical cure-all. It had no effect. But as random as it began, it ended. Mother's Day, 2009. Shane had taken that day off. He came back in the following day, and some of the hotel staff pulled him aside to share with him an odd encounter. One of the hotel bellmen, a guy named Ricardo, he was the first one to encounter the two extremely tall men as they entered the hotel lobby. Here's the quote that was given to me by Marsha. They asked for Shane Sovar, for the manager, and I told them, well, he's not here. Do you want to talk to someone else? And they said, no, we just want to talk to Shane Sovar. And that was the end of our conversation. Now, even though the bellman's encounter with these two men was quick and uneventful, it was their startling appearance which had more of an impact on him. Again, the quote, that was what really kept my attention. These guys were really tall, probably taller than average people. But he goes on to say, you know, they looked identical. They just look alike. And then he says, while I was talking with them, I was trying to look for any differences, and I just couldn't believe it. They were exactly identical. And he says they weren't old. They didn't look young. They just didn't look either too old or too young. Now, again, he didn't have much time to talk with them, so this was just the initial physical things that he noticed. Regarding their skin tone and the hats they wore, which were later identified as fedoras, the bellman stated, you know, again, their skin tone was pale. They had hats. They were dressed in all black. And it was a little bit shocking to see people dressed like that in the moment, but I didn't have much time to talk to them. Now, on the internet, people have said, oh, these are just guys in Halloween costumes. This is Mother's Day. This is where the misinformation comes into place because, you know, yes, it was around Halloween when Shane had the initial sighting, but not when these guys showed up. So when the bellman revealed to the MIB that Shane wasn't at the hotel, the MIB gave him a look like, no, we don't believe you. And they continued on to the next person in the lobby. This was an elderly woman who was the hotel tour desk operator at the time. Turns out this lady had a lengthy conversation with them, and one that affected her even more. She was almost in tears describing the ordeal as she revealed some of the things they discussed, things which made absolutely no sense to her at the time because she had no interest in this sort of thing. Things that involved governments and conspiracies and just nonsense stuff, at least according to her. But again, it was the MIB's distinct physical characteristics and overall demeanor that had the more profound impact. For example, her description was consistent with the bellman: no facial hair, eyebrows, or eyelashes. Yet it also appeared that they wore wigs attached to their hats, and their eyes were unusually large and distinctively blue, so much so that this woman felt hypnotized by them. They didn't even blink, and they responded like they could already read her mind. So she was trying not to think about Shane, but somehow the two men already knew what she was thinking, which she didn't understand how that was even possible to begin with. But one of the more puzzling questions that Shane and I wrestled with in our conversation is that if these MIB seem to know everything, then why didn't they just come on a different day? Maybe one where he was actually there. If the entities can read minds, they don't seem to be very smart minds. Or maybe minds that we just don't understand. When Shane reached out to his parking lot attendants for clues as to where the men could have come from, it gets even weirder. The parking attendants could see that these two men had parked on the far island across from the hotel, but they couldn't determine the exact make or model of the vehicle that they had arrived in. They could only identify that it was an all-black car with completely black windows and no license plates. Now, the only reason security camera footage of these two guys entering the hotel lobby exists is because of foresight from the hotel's director of security, who also happened to be the brother of the security manager who had the initial UFO sighting with Shane back in October. But Shane hadn't discussed the MIB visit when a copy of the footage suddenly shows up on his desk. And the security director goes, "Look, Shane, I don't know what happened to you, and I don't know who these guys are, but I want you to keep this just in case anything happens to you. Because the whole scenario and situation is freaking the hell out of me." Shane then handed that footage off to API, which eventually made its way online, and anyone can view it for themselves. Or just go to my website, normalparanormal.org, and you'll quickly find it. Now, of course, people complain it's not the greatest quality of video, which is always to be expected since no piece of paranormal footage is ever good enough, and even the best footage is too good altogether. Plus, for whatever reason, the owner of the hotel never wanted to invest in a top quality security system or a camera system, even though Shane always made the case to upgrade. And he says if they actually had upgraded the equipment, this stuff would be as clear as a bell, and you could maybe see some better stuff. And also, this is an animated GIF, so right now. Here are two recent photos of the hotel lobby, just so you can see that not much has changed, really. I mean, the hotel is still there, but it's no longer owned by the Sheraton. It's a Marriott instead. The Marriott Niagara Falls Hotel, to be exact. So if you want to take a trip there, send me some photos, please. Regardless of whether or not the MIB were filmed, again, we must ask ourselves, were these individuals even human to begin with? According to the bellman again, they sounded human to me. I can't say they didn't sound different than human. And he just reiterates the fact that he just felt that they were clones. They looked exactly the same to one another. For what it's worth, Shane has had some other interesting experiences of high strangeness before. Even long before this event, he can remember one instance of possible missing time, a second one involving seeing small people in his bedroom. One of those events was when he was in the 7th grade, which could have been probably sometime in the early 1980s. He and a friend both decided to take a shortcut through a forest to visit a new corner store that had opened up. But Shane had to be back in time for dinner. This is from his memory. He remembers seeing the sun setting, and then his friend notices this glowing orb in the forest, and it's coming right at them. And for whatever reason, they're terrified by this, so they just took off running. But the next thing Shane remembers is opening up the front door to his house, and his mother asking him, "Where the hell have you been?" And he's confused because he's like, we just went to the corner store. But he can't remember going to the corner store. He just remembers physically running from this glowing orb and then arriving home. There's nothing to suggest a definitive time delay either, apart from his mother telling him that the family had already had dinner about an hour ago. And then he had another encounter of seeing little men in his bed, or at the foot of his bed when he was 18. He can't recall much beyond that, though. There's a lot more to this case in this particular region that I'm currently pursuing. It's really fascinating, especially with a lot of his neighbors and his friends up there. They've had really remarkable cases. Now, people have asked me, well, had any of Shane's kids had strange experiences, right? Because sometimes in the alien abduction phenomenon, it seems to be like it goes through the family. And there is something that stands out as particularly intriguing, which I'll leave you with here. His son, Liam, who was 5 or 6 at the time, he drew a picture with little beings with big eyes around his bed. When Shane inquired as to who they were, his son responds, "Oh, they're the little ones that visit me." If you don't get a chance to speak today, feel free to visit my website, normalparanormal.org. Send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. There's a contact form on there, especially if you've had a strange encounter with one of these bizarre individuals. It doesn't have to be typical Men in Black. It can be anything. I mean, honestly, the stranger the better. Because a lot of times these things don't fit in a particular category, so people have refrained from sharing them with me. Look, don't worry about where it fits. If it's weird, share it with me. We'll go from there. Thank you so much for your time.